Many of our fans today will give a cheer, knowing we're finally covering Pioneer.
It only counts if it mounts. Comment below as we walk through the Week 10 recap of Outlaw Pioneer. Alrighty, gang, let's go ahead and address that elephant in the room. Yes, this is normally a State of the Meta series covering Standard. Unfortunately, not one major tournament has been reported or posted in the past week for Standard. So we just kind of had to shift that attention elsewhere, which honestly seems correct anyway, given how the current focus is mostly on Pioneer and a little bit on Modern, right?
Rakdos also maintains their lead of 13-6 for trophies in the Azorius Control V domain bet that we've had going all season. So that hasn't shifted at all. Given that we have mere weeks before rotation, it'll take a miracle to put domain back on top, but we'll still be watching all the same.
And with that, let's get into the tier list for Pioneer. So on top, we've got Abzan Amalia, followed by Izzet Phoenix, 2 Rakdos variants, and Green Devotion. Now, outside of Rakdos diverging into those 2 variants, these tier 1 archetypes aren't really a surprise to anyone. So let's go ahead and move on down to tier 2.
This is where we find both versions of Slickshot, making an appearance as Mono Red Aggro and Gruul Prowess, followed by Azorius Control.
And lastly, in Brewer's Corner, we've got some options for those who are tired of playing the same old decks. We've got 3 Kindred decks making appearances as Dark Goblins, Selesnya Angels, and Dimir Rogues have had an impact lately. Lastly, we have a wild Jeskai Creativity brew to introduce.
Love those alternate decks, especially Selesnya Angels. Rebels. TOAMagic has continued its partnership with the Rebellion for 4 months now, but this will likely be the last episode sponsored by them. So we want to take a moment to thank TOAMagic for its support as we've helped each other grow in the competitive MTG space. It isn't really every day that large vendors support our community, but TOA has consistently shown their willingness to work with us, and for that, we thank you.
We do indeed. So click the link below in our description to head on over after the video and check out their store. And while you're there, don't forget to use the code word REBELLION at checkout to save 5% and help the community.
Yes. Now, on to our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Abzan Amalia.
All right, Abzan Amalia. It just keeps putting up results, showing out with 14 top 8s across 14 events in the past week and a half, along with 4 trophy finishes. Now, shown here is Triosk's 32-player MTGO preliminary win. So let's talk about how this archetype has shifted recently. So first and foremost, you're going to see 2 lively Dirge. I'm going to go over here and highlight that so everybody can see the picture as well. This came in place of 2 of the return to ranks. Now, we still see a return to ranks sitting in there, but this is kind of like a graveyard Coco of sorts, and I think that's why it's getting pushed over return to ranks, because you can have nothing in your graveyard and you can still get value out of this. So I like where they've gone with this. There's a little bit more diversity in it, and I like where they tried to push it. Now on the sideboard, we're seeing Ruthless Lawbringer come in instead of having another Skyclave apparition, and we're also seeing Aven Interrupter in the sideboard over another Skyclave apparition that typically sit there, because traditionally in the past you're going to see 4 apparitions. So we're seeing some of these minor tweaks to what is essentially a Birthing Pod-esque deck in MTG Singleton.
Yeah, I'm seeing one of Bat in the main, one of Sin Collector in the sideboard. There's a ton of Singleton cards in here. Is this due to just it being a wide meta that you have to defend against, or is something else going on with the power dynamics between this deck and others?
So I think a big part of this is that you have so many tutors, and so you're able to play this silver bullet defense, right? Like if you've got Court of Calling ×4, and you've got those lively dirges, all of which can search up a specific creature, you have this beautiful scenario where you can play one of on this creature like an Aven Interrupter, knowing that you can find it 7 different ways. And you also still have collected companies as well to help ferret it out if you don't get it through a tutor effect. So there's just a lot of ways to go find the cards you need. And that's what I mean when I said it was kind of a Birthing Pod-esque deck, because that is functionally how Pod was created. You know, you have your 4 ofs that you have to hit for the combo, but then you have all of these 1 of silver bullets for various situations that you're going to need them for, and you're going to be rotating them in and out of matchups depending on which pieces fit. It makes it one of the most complex decks to sideboard for that alone.
Interesting. So it really does match up with what you need, getting it through the tutors. I appreciate that explanation, because it really didn't make any sense to me upon first glance, but now I understand. All right, so let's talk about another complex deck, Izzet Phoenix.
Alrighty. So, fellow Iowan Adam Tellis took the most reliable top 8 archetype in Pioneer currently to a semifinal finish at the 30-player Krypton Comics RCQ this past weekend, highlighting the best finish among 17 players to top 8 14 events in the past week and a half. So let's look at how they utilize those minor flex slots that this deck has, because for the most part, this deck's set in stone. It's not like you're going to play less than 4 Phoenix and Treasure Cruise. You're definitely going to be playing the 4 Shredder, the 4 Picklock Prankster, the Ops, the Sleight of Hands, the Considers. So you get into these flex slots and you start wondering, what can we do with like the 2 to 5 flex slots in Izzet Phoenix that matters? In this build, I like that we're on the 2 Spell Pierce. I think that really highlights that this deck wants to be able to play multiple spells in a turn while holding up a minor defense for only 1 mana. The 1 of Brazen Borrower in the main also falls along the path of there are some things that just need a universal answer. Even if it's for 1 turn, sometimes you just got to bounce a Grafdigger's Cage and go off. You know what I mean? So it's a smart way to go. And in the sideboard, you're going to see that 2 Anger of the Gods over the 2 Brotherhoods end, which tells me this person was sick of playing against Amalia, frankly.
Yeah. Anytime I see Exile right now in Pioneer, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, people are just sick of Amalia being on top. Can you explain the split among the types of counterspells here? It's a complex counterspell suite. It looks tuned. What are we looking to counter the most from the other decks with that sideboard plan?
So with the 2-1-1 split on Mystical Dispute, Spell Pierce number 3, and Negate coming off the sideboard, and there's even an Aether Gust in there as a 1 of 2, if I remember correctly, you're looking at a counter suite that's trying to adjust for minor margin points, right? So there's going to be mirror matches, right? And that's where you're going to say, okay, Mystical Dispute on turn 1 against a Ledger Shredder, critical. Critical. Being able to shut down those Ledger Shredders before they get going, big part of the game plan. Also having Mystical Dispute for some of the control lists. We saw Blue-White Control do well recently in this. It's a big deal. And there's, of course, combo lists. You know, there's Lotus Field combo, and it's going to dip into that area occasionally. So I get where we're trying to have a lot of tempo with a Phoenix list, and thus our counterspells at 1 mana are going to be a majority of what we have, which Mystical Dispute against the right deck is 1 mana. Spell Pierce is going to be 1 mana. So we're seeing 5 1-mana spells for tempo purposes and 1 hard counter with Negate.
Okay. All right. Wow. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah. It definitely is finely tuned. Izzet Phoenix has been around for a while. This makes sense. Let's talk about a deck that's new to me because it's been a while since I've actually really played and focused on Pioneer. Rakdos Souls.
So Rakdos Souls is the newest Rakdos variant to hit the scene, featuring a lovely combo with the Soul Cauldron, Tree of Perdition, and Volderon Thrillseeker. The goal is to use all of those early blood tokens and Fable discards to dump a Tree of Perdition into the graveyard, which then gets picked up by the Soul Cauldron and tossed as an activated ability onto your Volderon Thrillseeker or even a smaller creature. You shift the life total of your opponent to what Thrillseeker's power and toughness is, and then you fling the Thrillseeker at them to kill them all at once. So this is kind of a clever little combo. Now, the early builds of this didn't even have Vein Ripper and Sorin. They were just kind of a Tree of Perdition combo deck, right? Then they realized that we're already playing a ton of vampires. Like, we want the Epicures, we want the Harvesters because we want those blood tokens anyway. Well, now we have most of the vampire deck. Why not just get the Vein Rippers and the Sorins? And instead of playing Preacher of the Schisms and Caustic Broncos, as you would have seen in our last sideboard guide, let's push instead into a secondary combo. So now this deck has like a 2 combo scenario going on between the Tree of Perdition and Soul Cauldron and Vein Ripper and Sorin. I like what they're trying to do here. It's A-B, kind of like you deal with one, you're screwed on the second one idea. I don't know that it always works, but we've seen this one explode in popularity lately.
Yeah, I can see why it's popular. It plays a pretty cool tribal you don't often see. But I do love the simplicity of this combo. Very nice. In your opinion, though, does the deck play enough early interaction game 1? Does it stand up to something like Aggro?
I think it's going to struggle. I mean, the nice side of it is as long as aggro doesn't get to kill you outright, there are many scenarios where Tree of Perdition, you can just hard cast it on, turn 4, turn 5, switch the life total. Now you've gained some life potentially. And your opponent's not sitting at a very good, you know what I mean? Like, it's, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be great against Slickshot. I'm just going to put that out there. I think the sideboard heavily reflects that you're going to need those fatal pushes post board, and even then, it may not be enough. But if you're not playing hyper aggro, I think this is going to grind through most of the mid-range, and likely it grinds through the other Rakdos Vampire lists because of that secondary combo.
Yeah, it's a fun list, but if you're piloting this, be sure to pay attention to your local metas. If you're seeing a lot of slick shot, Gruul Prowess, be careful. But let's talk about another Rakdos list. Plain old Rakdos Vampires.
So, if you thought the OG version of Rakdos Vamps was going to curl up and die just because a Soul Cauldron and Tree made their way into the meta, you would be wrong. Shown here is Nick Haven's 17-player RCQ winning list from Krypton Comics this past weekend, and as an archetype, Rakdos Vampires still managed 10 top 8s and a trophy over the past 2 weeks. Looking at this, there are some differences in how they built, right? So the first one that I think is important is there's a Kalitas sitting in the main board. That is not a common thing to see, but I think it's going to become more common because given that this has more of a Rakdos mid-range vibe to it than just strictly Rakdos Vampires, I think we want these Kalitases. We want the ability to exile everything from Amalia the moment we kill it. We cannot afford to let the graveyard get back into it. And this does a great job of saying Amalia and Phoenix are in tier 1. We need to kill things and put them in exile, not just put them in the grave. So I like where they went with this. I also like that there's the two main board Null Priest of Oblivion. Two main board Null Priest of Oblivion. I think it's strong. The ability to recur, especially with all the pick your poisons running around to grab Vein Rippers, I can see where this actually lets you grind right through.
Yeah, that's a new addition if I'm correct. I love that card back when it was in standard. It's definitely doing work here. Um, do you think this deck is stronger in this iteration without the Preacher of the Schisms and the Caustic Broncos? What does it gain from diverting resources away from those cards to other cards that it could focus on in the main?
Well, you're losing a lot of the traditional grind, but I think if you look at the format, you're going to note that there isn't a lot to grind against. The decks that are going hyper aggro, you're not really trying to grind with them. You're just trying to keep up long enough to turn the tide and swing back, right? And Vein Ripper is really the pivotal moment in those matchups. So we're focusing on the Vein Ripper, but we're also putting things down like Kalitas early that make it difficult for hyper aggro to swing through us. You know, the lifelink on a 3/4 body, still relevant, even if you're not getting a bunch of removal to back it up. That said, the Preachers, the Caustic Broncos, those would be more helpful if I was expecting a ton of Vamp Mirrors. But if I'm expecting Amalia, like what are they doing against Amalia? They don't really care that much about either of those cards. They just kind of chuckle and combo off in your face while you're trying to draw extra cards. So I can see why we've eschewed that plan and we've moved towards a more linear game plan.
Things seem like they've sped up in Pioneer a lot lately. Yeah, I totally see that. Let's talk about the last deck in our tier 1 listing, Mono Green Devotion.
Green Devo. You don't have Karn anymore, but you're still out here grinding. Now, did it claim a single trophy? Absolutely not. Did it top 8 12 times across 14 events, including a second place finish at the 97-player Energy Series 5K trial? Yup. So, shown here is the runner-up list by Cliff Boyardee, highlighting a return to the ever-popular Green Devotion archetype. So let's take a look at how this list has shifted in the absence of Karn. Now, first and foremost, Ulvenwald Oddity. This is the kill con. It's been centralized. This is what everyone's using. I would say if you haven't played against this, you don't know how powerful it is. But this plus Nykthos is a nightmare to deal with. Giving everything haste, flipping, and rolling, it's a lot. Now, the Outcast Trailblazer is, in my opinion, the reason this archetype can still survive. Without Trailblazer, we do not have the card advantage to guarantee we can keep up with a lot of the other archetypes and grind through them. But Trailblazer is putting in some serious work here and makes the oddity only look better as it starts drawing you additional cards.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite archetypes personally, just because of the grind. You got to keep the grind in mind, and this deck does it really well. But I want to ask really quickly about the top end. Is this the best top end card that this deck can achieve?
I mean, Emrakul is not necessarily what you're going to use as a top end for most matchups. I think Emrakul is what you want when you're playing against combo decks. Because what you're doing with the Promised End Emrakul is you're taking control of their turn and you're blowing up every game plan they have as quickly as you can. And then, of course, they're getting another turn after that to try to recover. But against a combo deck, you know, where you can cast things like Indomitable and then get nothing, you can see where this is, you're able to completely screw them out of the combo game plan. It's not necessarily great against anything mid-range, and it does almost nothing against the hyper aggro list, so you don't need it. That's why it's sitting in the sideboard. But yeah, against decks that are hell-bent on control and hell-bent on combo, you want top-end cards that are going to be excellent at disrupting, and that's what this does.
Yeah, this card's really come into people's consciousness lately. But I like Ulvenwald Oddity. I think that's a solid win con for the deck. And that does it for our tier 1 archetypes. We're going to switch over now to tier 2, where I will start by talking about Mono Red Aggro. Toyota Hiroki took down a 56-player Champions Cup qualifier in Fukuoka, Japan this past weekend with Mono Red Aggro, showing the latest iteration in a thrilling victory over Goblins in the finals. This archetype managed 6 top 8s and a single trophy over the past week, but let's talk about the design of this particular version. We do have a full set of Light Up the Stage, really enhances and plays well with the Prowess builds. I kind of wish we had this in Standard. We have 3 of the Gitu Lava Runners and 4 Soul Scar Mages. These basically allow you to utilize Wizard's Lightning, very effective piece of removal, very effective burn card. And then along with that, something new, 4 Magebane Lizards. I was thinking Izzet Phoenix as soon as I saw this. It does really well against that deck, and we're main boarding these. We've got 2 sideboard Roiling Vortexes. Obviously, that does work against Amalia. And then, of course, the 3 Ferocidons, the Raging Ferocidons, also do work against the top deck in the format.
Now, I look at this, Max, and between Slickshot and Magebane Lizard coming out in Outlaws, does Mono Red finally have the speed and hate that it needs to compete at the top of this metagame?
I honestly believe it does. The deck does have the tools now to push opponents with imperfect hands, especially push aggro advantage over the other decks. And with a sideboard slot against the top 2 decks, Phoenix and Amalia, I think this particular version of the deck is well positioned to sneak by and take some trophies.
Fair. And with that, we're going to go ahead and turn to the next one on the tier 2 list, another Slickshot deck, Gruul Prowess.
Let's go Slickshot, making waves in Pioneer. So Panagiotis Savidis, I hope I pronounced that correctly, smashed through a 21-player RCQ in Athens, Greece this past weekend using Gruul Prowess. 1 of 5 players top 8 with the archetype over the past week, and the only one to snag a trophy. This leads to the usual divide among players, of course, right? We've been having this discussion in the Rebellion Discord, but the players who love Slickshot, what's the best Slickshot build? And typically it's Mono Red or Gruul for most people. Both of those offering the right tools to make Slickshot fly. But let's dive into this particular build right here. I want to start by talking about the 4 Blossoming Defense, right? Green brings us this card. It works great on the stack when you're up against another deck. They're trying to remove your Slickshot or remove your Prowess creature. You can slide this onto the stack and really do away with all the spells they've dumped in trying to destroy your creature. If you keep pumping it up, you're doing that mage battle. We've got 2 Atarka's Commands in here as well. Obviously, being able to stop life gain temporarily, providing reach. So, I'm thinking against the top 2 decks, Amalia, Izzet, right? So it does well against those.
Fair. Now, looking at this, what does Gruul Prowess gain versus just playing Mono Red? Like, where do we gain points? Because we have 2 different Slickshot builds here, Max, and you could go either way. Why Gruul Prowess over Mono Red?
I feel like there's just a little bit of subtlety here in being able to be defensive, protect your own creatures. Green provides you that ability. We don't see Snakeskin Veil in here, but we do see the Blossoming Defense as an example of what green can provide, just a little bit of protection to your important creatures and still boost them. Still Spark Prowess, still make that work, especially since Pioneer is seeing a ton of early game interaction in a lot of these iterations of these current decks. And I also want to point to a card that does really well in Standard, Questing Druid, providing access to more cards on the front side and giving you generally a strong body on the back end. So having access to those might be just enough to win margins against red.
That's fair. And I mean, if you have a more interactive, metagame, I think Gruul Prowess, it draws more cards. It's going to let you go a little bit deeper in your interactions and your game plan. So I can see what you're talking about, where it's a little subtle, but I can see where it gains points there. So with that, we're going to move on to the only control deck in the entire metagame right now doing anything, Azorius Control.
Wow, I get to talk about Azorius Control 2 weeks in a row in 2 different formats.
Nope.
Garrick Alford snagged the trophy in a 97-player NRG 5K Pioneer trial this past weekend, showing the strength of Azorius Control to a format that has really eschewed it as an option for really quite some time. But let's take a look at this particular build. We've got 2 3 steps ahead, 2 sensors, 3 Dovin's Vetoes, 1 Jawari Disruption, and 4 No More Lies as the full counterspell suite. I love all those counterspell cards, right? Players love that. 2 March of Otherworldly Lights, and 1 Get Lost make up the single target removal cards. And of course, what would Azorius Control be without the board wipes? 2 Lockdowns, 2 Supreme Verdicts, 2 Sunfalls, and a single Farewell making up the board wipes. I want to point to a small combo in here: Narset plus a single copy of Days Undoing, and then also the land, the Sanitarium, right? Narset shutting off your ability for your opponent to draw cards, and of course the symmetrical drawing effects will take their toll on the opponent in conjunction with that. We have 1 Sunken Citadel, of course, in conjunction with 2 Halls of Storm Giants and 2 Anchorages, and also helping with the Sanitarium as well.
Yeah, and that Sanitarium Narset is called a soft lock, and I haven't seen one in a minute, but that is a beautiful little soft lock where right at the end of their draw step, you just activate the Sanitarium, force them to draw again, and discard the card that they just drew because they can't draw again with Narset. So they just have to immediately discard the card on their draw step before they even make it to the main phase. It's subtle, but a soft lock like that is difficult to come out of, so I can see why they put it in there.
Oh, yeah.
That said, I look at this. We've seen Azorius Control with Lotus Fields and Strict Proctors. What makes this better than the Lotus Field version?
Well, the deck, honestly, Lotus Field, since I last saw it, I asked myself the same question, but looking at the field of decks, we are seeing some viable hate against Lotus Field, and that started to happen towards the end of the life cycle of that deck. Also, as we noted earlier, Pioneer has really sped up since Lotus Field was popular. You're starting to see, heavy prowess builds. You're starting to see combo decks that are going off by turn 3. So for that reason alone, it's like with Lotus Field, it feels like you're trying to find your combo, you're trying to find the proper cards, while the opponent a lot of times is already, they've already got their game plan underway. So I can sort of see why that would dissuade people from playing the Lotus Field version of this deck.
That makes a lot of sense. It's hard to take turn 3 off just to set yourself up to explode on turn 4 if turn 3 is when you die, which Slick Shot tends to do. So I can see where that's a bit of a problem. That said, we're going to flip things over. It's time for my favorite segment every single week, Brewer's Corner. Love this one. We're going to kick things off with a little bit of Dark Goblins. So credit here goes to Mori Ryoma. Again, apologies if I butcher the name. I've seen variants of this list for a long time now. I've never seen a correct build until today. Now, the beauty of this is we've got these 4 caverns and an all kindred list. You're not having issues with control. You're going right through them. That shouldn't be a problem. More importantly, this list embraces the Call of the Death Dweller, which I don't know if you guys have ever had the opportunity to do a Call of the Death Dweller into a Chain Whirler, but it is a one-sided Wrath of God because you put a Death Touch counter on Chain Whirler and it deals 1 damage to everything, killing everything on their board. So it's got some weird little combos in it that make it exceptional in how it explodes. It's also got the classic card advantage engines coming off of Snoop. And you've got the ability to push really heavily with these Runevelt Horde Masters. And let's not forget, Fable makes 2 goblins. So you're still getting value there, and you're able to start going wide and comboing with the backside of this as always. It's an interesting list. It's a fast list. I'm very curious to see, how it does as the meta progresses, but the fact that it's able to do as well as it did, and it finished second in a major tournament in Japan, tells me it's got some legs to it.
I love the Japanese meta for bringing decks out of, obscurity a lot of times. But speaking of which, let's talk about a deck that I used to pilot quite a while ago. Let's talk about the current iteration of Selesnya Angels. Credit to Splash for fixing on this one right here. The early interaction, we're seeing 3 portable holes. I think that card is doing work right now in the current meta, a very aggressive meta. We're also seeing 1 copy of Masked Vandal. Very interesting. It's got the shape-shifting changeling ability. But also it can be a 2-for-1, especially when you're playing against like the Rakdos Souls deck, when they've got that 1 critical piece that they need on their board. This will exile it. 3 Kayla's Reconstructions, 4 Collected Companies are now becoming the norm in Selesnya Angels decks. That's just, you're going to see that across most builds. This particular iteration utilizes all 4 Skyclave apparitions, so that tells you right there, that signifies right there that Aggro is really king right now. Being able to remove the opponent's pieces are important. The sideboard plan, 2 Invasion of Gobakons for the obvious board wipes that are coming your way. And then I want to point out Archon of Amalia. This card pretty much shuts down the Prowess decks, shuts down Nykthos. Might be a critical piece going forward into the future for this archetype.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to Splash for Fixing a little bit about this list, and the basics of it are you're going to lose to Amalia, but you are going to smoke the Vampires list, and you're going to beat Phoenix pretty handily. So, if you're looking at a metagame in your local RCQ and you're just like, I don't know, I'm seeing all this Vampires and I'm seeing all this Phoenix and maybe one Amalia player I think I can dodge, maybe it's for you. Maybe it's for you. But with that, we're going to shift on over. I believe this one just took down an RCQ this past weekend. Dimir Rogues. Alrighty, credit to Stipular Coda 572 of the MTG Rebellion Discord. Thank you for sending us this list. Got a nice RCQ dub, and will be qualified for the next one. Now, looking at this, where has Rogues gone? We now have Zareth San in the main. Love this. Especially love the idea that we're going to be able to snag those Vein Rippers out of the graveyard and drag them out over to our side of the battlefield. That seems spicy. Tiny Bones is similarly making them a little terrified of that scenario if you get up to 6 mana. And in the meantime, we've got the Fairy Masterminds, so Green Devotion wants to draw extra cards. So do we. That'll work. Cards for everybody, right? And last but not least here, I'm looking over at Jace the Perfected Mind, and it took me a minute to find why I like this, because I kept looking at it thinking, what makes this better than any other card you could put in there? And historically, Rogues has tried to get card advantage using Into the Story to draw cards. This seems like an upgraded version of that, because you're able to play a little defense with it early on, and then you're able to minus it and draw 3 like an Ancestral effect, which in some cases is going to be for only 3 mana in the mid game when they already have 20 cards sitting in their graveyard because you've been playing for a minute and it's been grinding back and forth. So then you pay 3 mana, draw 3 cards. Not too shabby of an investment, in my opinion.
No, not at all. No wonder Stipular Coda got through with that one. Totally cool. Let's talk about another deck from the Discord Rebellion, Athena the Bun. Jeskai Creativity. So from our past discussions of creativity decks, if you watched our old Pioneer State of the Metas, creativity decks need cheap artifacts. Reliable top-end creatures. Those are the 2 basic cores of the deck. Here we see several potential artifacts with Fable the Mirror Breaker, Big Score, Prismari Command, creating a treasure token, even Sunfall, and then Get Lost if you target your own Fable Goblin. You can also get some artifacts that way. But 3 Lightning Helix are in the deck for a little bit of life gain, a little bit of support against aggro. We are seeing some aggro in the meta. And then, of course, I also want to point out the 2 Myrics in the mana base, also able to create artifacts for the deck. The top end is Dream Trawler, and I asked Athena the Bun about this, why Dream Trawler? And she said it's a great card versus your basic removal suites. It's also an awesome card to be able to copy with Fable, right? The downfall of using legendary creatures for the top end is you don't get to copy them with Fable. This way, you do get to copy some Dream Trawlers and really make a mess of your opponent. Full Leyline of Sanctity as well. I asked about this as well, and she said there is some hand hate targeting going on, and this protects you from that.
Fair. And I love the tech in the sideboard with the Quake Bringers to try to handle Amalia combo. That is spicy. I love where she went with that. Alrighty. And that is going to bring us to that final segment we have here, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 12 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 11 of Outlaw Pioneer?
The top 4 of Pioneer is back to Amalia, Phoenix, Rakdos variants, and Green Devotion, similar to really where it was positioned before Karn was banned.
Meanwhile, the Hyper Aggro Slickshot variants are making their presence known while Control resurfaces as the meta coalesces and defines itself.
But after spending more time testing with the Rebellion Discord, we are seeing archetypes come out of left field and take down local RCQs as well.
All of this to say that while the top 4 archetypes look dominant, there are certainly ways to push through each in the meta, and the brewing opportunities abound when you can define what matchups you need to win for your local meta.
For instance, that Selesnya Angels list is known to beat the crap out of Phoenix and Rakdos Vampires, but I doubt it could keep up with Amalia.
Similarly, we're seeing mono red builds that have strong sideboard plans for various combo decks, but are willing to give up game 1 unless the opponent stumbles.
The key for this RCQ season is defining what your opponents are likely taking to the local tournament scene, then positioning yourself to bring a deck that has favorable matchups against just that and a majority of your other opponents.
So, when in doubt, pilot the deck you have a decent amount of practice with so you don't get game losses for lack of experience. But whenever possible, take the list that'll upend your local meta.
Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you, Rebels, for supporting us. Special shout out now to our members who support our content weekly. Be sure to comment below. Let us know what you're seeing on Ladder. And we'll be back next week with more analysis, possibly even on Standard this time.
Until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.